Chapter 3. Components and links. The basic elements of a schematic. Components and links are the bricks and mortar of a SynthMaker schematic. Understanding how to edit and manipulate these basic elements is essential for working with the software, as most of the interaction you'll have with SynthMaker will be through the schematic. We introduced the concept of components and links right at the start of this guide. We'll go over this again now, but in a little more detail this time. Components. Components provide the functionality in the schematic. Each one performs some well-defined task. They are represented by rectangular blocks with circular adornments called connectors, which may appear on the left-hand or right-hand sides, or both. The connectors on the left-hand side are called input connectors. These provide the component with information that it uses when performing its defined task. The connectors on the right-hand side are called output connectors. These provide information about the outcome of the task performed by the component. In the example above, the string replace component takes 3 inputs: the original text string, the position at which the replacement is to be made, and the text string to be inserted. The output is the modified string. Links. Links define how information flows between components in a schematic. A link passes from the output connector of one component to the input connector of another component. The direction of information flow is generally left to right, or from output to input, but in some cases information can pass from input to output as well. You can have multiple links from the same output connector. You can also have multiple links passing to the same input connector. However, you can only have one link going from the same output connector to the same input connector. When multiple links arrive at the same input connector, then, for some connector types, the data from each link is added together. In other cases, the data is just merged. Links can be connected from a component into itself to create feedback paths. However, in some circumstances this may create an infinite loop. If this happens, the software will freeze the affected link. No data is allowed to pass through a frozen link. The only way to get rid of a frozen link is to delete it. Note that links between stream, poly or mono connectors never become frozen, as feedback is always allowed in these cases. Okay, so that covers what components and links actually are. Well, now look at how you manipulate them. Components. Adding a component. Dragging from the toolbox. To add a component to a schematic, simply go to the toolbox, pick the component you want and drag it into your schematic. Stacking components. Sometimes you may want to add more than one component at a time. You can do this by stacking up components before dragging them all to the schematic. To increase the number in the stack, just click on the component the same number of times as the number you require. You'll see a counter appear in the bottom left corner of the component in the toolbox. To decrease the number in the stack, right-click on the component. When you have the number you need, just drag them across, as before. Keyboard shortcuts. As you become familiar with the software, you will find that there is a certain small group of components that you use much more than others. In order to save you time constantly going back and forth to the toolbox, you can make use of keyboard shortcuts. Where a component has a shortcut key assigned, this is displayed on the component in the toolbox. Disabled components. On some occasions it is not possible for you to add a particular component to your schematic. This is because some components are only allowed once within a particular module or the whole schematic. If this happens, the component will have a gray cross over the top of it. Hitting return. One final way to add components from the toolbox is to use the return key on the keyboard. This is handy if you've just done a search, say. Hitting return when in the toolbox or the search bar will always add the currently selected component to the schematic. Selections and the action panel. To select a component, simply click on it. When you do this, you'll see the action panel. This contains a number of buttons. The X button will delete the component. The N button will allow you to name the component. Other buttons may appear depending on the type of component selected, more on these later. The commands in the action panel can also be invoked from the menu bar and the context menu. To get the context menu, right-click on the component. Note that as well as the selected component, any links that start and end in the component that's selected will also be considered part of the selection. Moving components. To move a component. 1. Move your mouse over it. The cursor will change to move/select. 2. Click and hold the mouse button. The cursor will change to move. 3. Drag to the desired position and release the mouse button. For fine movements you can use the nudge feature. With the component selected, use the cursor keys to move it up, down, left or right by 1 grid square. Naming components. You can give a component a name. This is just a label that can be used to remind you the role of a component in your schematic. To give a component a name, click the N button on the action panel or right-click on the component and select Rename. Alternatively, you can select the component and press Ctrl+R. An edit box will appear above the component. Type the name here, then press Enter, Tab, or just click on another part of your schematic. You can press ESC at any time to cancel. Direct interaction. For a more interactive way to add names, hover the mouse over the area just above the component and hold Ctrl. The frame of the name box will be highlighted. Click in the box and proceed as before. Editing names. To edit a name, you can use the action panel and right-click Options as before, or you can just click on it as shown below. Deleting components. Deleting a component is extremely easy. The quickest way to do this is to select it, then press the Del key. You can also press the X button on the action panel, or right-click on the component and select Delete. Resizing. Some components can be resized to make them bigger or smaller. Some components only resize horizontally, others resize vertically as well. If a component can be resized, the resize control will appear in the bottom right corner of the selection highlight. The control is a white arc that traces the corner of the selection. To resize, move your mouse over the resize control. The mouse pointer will change to the resize cursor. Click and hold, then drag to resize. Multiple selections. You can select multiple components at the same time. This is useful if you want to move a group of components but maintain their relative spacing, or if you want to delete a whole load of things in one go. There are 2 ways to create a multiple selection. The first way is to hold down Shift and then click on each of the components in turn. If a component is already selected, clicking on it will remove it from the selection. A quicker way to make a multiple selection is to drag select. This involves dragging out a rectangle to enclose all the components that you want to select. To drag select. 1. Click on the blank part of the schematic to the top left of the components you want to select. 2. Holding the mouse down, move the mouse down and to the right. You'll see a dotted rectangle appear as you move. 3. The components will show as selected as you move the mouse, so when the selection is what you want, release the button. Connector labels. Most components have a short label for each of their input connectors. There isn't enough room on the component body for both inputs and output labels. The outputs are usually less ambiguous and fewer in number, and so input labels are usually preferred. Component labels are usually very short and provide a quick reminder of what each connector is for. If you need more information, you can select the component by clicking on it. Where available, additional connector labels will appear to the left and right of the component.